Engineer humiliates black bricklayer without realizing he would fire him in front of everyone. Can you please be quiet and let the professionals speak? Richard's voice cut through the air like a razor, instantly silencing the makeshift meeting room on the construction site. We don't pay bricklayers to think, just to follow instructions. Andre Jefferson felt the heat rising in his neck as dozens of eyes turned to him. At 42, with 2 decades of experience in construction, he had never been humiliated so publicly. His only crime had been pointing out a critical flaw in the foundation design that could compromise the entire 30-story corporate building. With all due respect, sir, Andre replied with surprising calm, the slope of this land will cause uneven pressure on the northeast foundations. The calculations don't take into account the calculations? Richard interrupted with an exaggerated laugh. Turning to the team of engineers and managers, listen up, everyone. The bricklayer now understands structural calculations. Maybe we should give him his diploma, since he clearly knows more than someone with a master's degree from Stanford. Nervous laughter echoed around the room. Andre kept his gaze steady, breathing deeply to control the anger boiling inside him. It wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice, but public humiliation hurt differently. Richard Harrington was the new chief engineer at Horizon Constructions, hired just 3 months ago and already known for his explosive temper and arrogance. His impeccable blazer and Italian shoes contrasted with the simple clothes and callous hands of the workers he supervised with constant disdain. If you want to keep your job on this project, Richard continued, approaching Andre with a cold smile, I suggest you stick to mixing cement and leave the important decisions to those who study for it. The silence was palpable. Some workers looked down at the floor, embarrassed. Others, mainly the white engineers, smiled discreetly, as if approving of the bricklayer being put in his place. What no one noticed was a calm in Andre's eyes. Not resignation, but the tranquility of someone watching a predator walk straight into a trap. Understood, sir, Andre replied simply, gathering his notes. I just thought I should mention it. Richard smiled victoriously. Now that we've resolved this hierarchy issue, can we continue? We have a tight schedule. The meeting proceeded with Richard dominating the conversation, pointing to charts and schedules on his tablet as he explained changes to the project that would save time and money. No one noticed Andre discreetly typing a message on his old cell phone. At the end of the meeting, as workers began to disperse, a notification sounded on Richard's phone. The engineer frowned as he read the message, his face visibly paling. Emergency meeting with the owner in 15 minutes, he announced in a tense voice. It looks like Thomas Jefferson is coming to personally assess the progress of the work. A murmur ran through the group. Thomas Jefferson was a reclusive owner of Horizon Constructions, rarely seen on construction sites. His presence meant something extremely important or extremely problematic. Richard nervously adjusted his tie as he tried to project confidence. Get everything ready. I want this place spotless. As everyone rushed about, no one noticed a discreet smile on Andre's face. No one noticed when he left the room and walked calmly to the administrative trailer. No one imagined that behind that simple construction worker's uniform lay a story that was about to turn the construction site and Richard Harrington's life upside down. 15 minutes turned into an hour of tense waiting in the administrative trailer. Richard paced back and forth, checking his watch, while the other engineers pretended to review blueprints. No one mentioned the elephant in the room. Thomas Jefferson never made unscheduled visits, and when he did, he rarely brought good news. Is he coming because of the budget cuts I approved? Richard whispered to his assistant. I explained that we saved almost $1 million on foundation materials. I don't know, sir, the assistant replied nervously. The message just said he needed to evaluate the project personally. Outside, Andre slipped out to his car, a modest sedan parked far from the executive area. He opened the trunk, changed his work shirt for a clean, well-ironed dress shirt, and took out an elegant leather briefcase and a pair of thin-rimmed glasses. He's here, someone shouted. Everyone rushed to the entrance as a shiny black Mercedes pulled up. Richard straightened his tie and was the first to approach, his hand outstretched. Mr. Jefferson, what an honor. We are perfectly on schedule. The driver's door opened first, revealing a security guard in a dark suit. Then, from the rear door, emerged a middle-aged black man in an impeccable suit, his serious face marked by lines of experience. Richard froze. "I'm sorry, we're expecting Mr. Thomas Jefferson." The man extended his hand. Thomas Andre Jefferson, owner of Horizon Constructions. The shock on the faces of everyone present would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. Richard blinked several times, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "But you're—" Richard stammered. "The owner of the company, yes," Thomas replied with surgical calm. "And also the bricklayer you humiliated in front of the entire crew a few hours ago." A deathly silence fell over the construction site. Richard turned completely pale. One of the other engineers stepped forward. "Mr. Jefferson, there must have been some misunderstanding. Mr. Harrington didn't know." "Didn't know I was the owner?" Thomas finished. "That's exactly the point. Nobody knew, because I didn't want them to." Thomas looked around at the workers now gathering at a distance, watching with growing curiosity. 15 years ago, I founded Horizon Constructions with the promise of revolutionizing the way we build. But over time, I noticed we were losing touch with what happens on a construction site. So, with every new major project, I spend the first few weeks working incognito, trading my suit for a mason's uniform and my last name for my middle name. Richard looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Jefferson, I had no idea." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Thomas interrupted sharply. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me with respect. But because you thought I was just a black construction worker, you felt entitled to humiliate me in public." An older man with dark skin and gray hair stepped forward. Walter Green, the master builder who had overseen the project for decades. "Mr. T," he said familiarly, "you could have warned me you were doing your special inspection again." Thomas smiled for the first time. "And miss a chance to see how things really work, Walter? You know that defeats the purpose." Walter nodded, turning to Richard with disappointment. "I've known Thomas for 30 years. We worked together as bricklayers before he started the company. He always says that a building is only as strong as its weakest foundation, and a company is only as honest as its most arrogant employee." Thomas adjusted his glasses, a subtle but effective transformation from his bricklayer persona. Meanwhile, workers who had witnessed Andre's humiliation earlier couldn't hide their smiles. Richard attempted a desperate recovery. "Mr. Jefferson, if you'll give me the opportunity to explain my vision for this project." "Your vision?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "The same vision that ignored a warning about structural flaws in the Northeast foundations? The same vision that prioritized cost-cutting over safety." He motioned to Walter, who stepped forward with a folder. "I've already asked Walter to review the concerns I raised this morning. We discovered that the foundations are already showing microcracks exactly where I indicated." Thomas turned to the engineers. "I want a full meeting in 15 minutes in the main trailer. Bring all the blueprints, cost spreadsheets, and technical decisions made in the last 3 months." As the group dispersed, Thomas stepped toward Richard, lowering his voice. "You know what's most ironic, Mr. Harrington? If you had simply listened to the bricklayer, you would have impressed the owner of the company with your humility and collaboration. Instead," he left the sentence hanging, adjusting his wristwatch. Richard stood motionless, his face a mask of terror. In the main trailer, Thomas wasted no time. "Let's get right to the point. Why were my observations about the foundations not only ignored but ridiculed?" Richard cleared his throat. "Mr. Jefferson, there was a misunderstanding. I was just reinforcing the hierarchy." "Hierarchy?" Thomas interrupted, grabbing his tablet. "Our manual clearly states that any employee, regardless of position, has a duty to report structural flaws." He tapped the screen, and Richard's recorded voice filled the trailer. "Asterisk, here, we work with calculations, not with the eye of a bricklayer who doesn't even know how to hold a tape measure properly." Asterisk. Richard loosened his tie, suffocated by his own arrogance. "In the last 2 hours," Thomas continued, projecting documents onto the wall, "we reviewed all of your engineering decisions." An auditor stood. "We found 17 safety violations, the most serious being the Northeast foundations. We also identified unauthorized material substitutions and falsified test reports. Richard turned pale. I can explain. An engineer on the team broke in. Mr. Jefferson, several of us warned Mr. Harrington about these problems. He insisted the calculations were correct and that the savings were necessary. For what? Thomas asked. For the end-of-project bonus. Another engineer confessed. If we saved over $1 million, we'd all get a substantial bonus. Richard stood abruptly. This is a conspiracy. I'm a respected professional with a master's from Stanford. I'm not going to let a bunch of bricklayers? Black people? Thomas finished sharply. Go on. Finish your thought. Richard collapsed into his chair, defeated. Thomas handed him a folder, his termination letter. Am I being fired? Richard asked incredulously. I have 2 options for you, Thomas replied. 1. Termination for cause, with civil proceedings for negligence and falsification. Your license will be revoked. Richard swallowed hard. Option 2. Voluntary departure. In exchange, you'll return all bonuses and work 6 months as a volunteer in our training program for young people from disadvantaged communities. You have 5 minutes to decide. Outside, Thomas addressed the gathered workers. Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Andre Jefferson, founder of Horizon. Some of you know me as Andre, the novice bricklayer. Surprised looks and smiles spread among the workers. I'm here for 2 reasons. First, to announce that Richard Harrington is no longer part of Horizon. Stunned silence followed, then spontaneous applause, which Thomas silenced with a gesture. The second reason is more important. At Horizon, we don't just build buildings. We build mutual respect. It doesn't matter if you have a PhD or learned on the streets. Your knowledge is valuable. Your voice deserves to be heard. The trailer door opened, and Richard emerged, carrying his belongings. His shoulders slumped as he passed through the crowd, facing a corridor of stairs, not mocking but pitying. 6 months later, the Horizon Construction's tower stood imposingly against the city skyline, its foundations reinforced exactly where Thomas had warned. In a conference room on the 30th floor, Walter, now director of operations, presented the results of a new talent integration program. Safety ratings had improved by 78% since implementing open communication protocols. Thomas later visited the training center, where Richard, now thinner, unshaven, but with a different look in his eyes, was teaching structural calculations to young students from disadvantaged communities. How are you adjusting? Thomas asked. Richard hesitated. I thought it would be punishment, teaching calculus to kids who barely finished high school, but I've discovered something unexpected. They learn fast. They ask questions you'd never consider. They see solutions that aren't in the books. Thomas nodded. It's amazing what we discover when we stop judging by appearances, isn't it? Richard studied the floor. I learned that lesson on my first day. In 2 weeks, my term of service ends, Richard said. I've had job offers, but I've asked to stay on as a volunteer instructor. I have some promising students I don't want to abandon. A discreet smile appeared on Thomas's face. Approved. As Thomas returned to his office, he reflected on the journey, from humiliated bricklayer to respected owner. He had built more than buildings. He had built a legacy of dignity and respect. On the wall of Horizon's lobby, a golden plaque displayed the company's new motto, Asterisk, we build structures with materials, but we build respect with humility. Asterisk, Richard had learned that every structure, no matter how imposing, begins with a solid foundation. Life had taught him that the same principle applies to human character. The humiliation he had inflicted on a mere bricklayer had destroyed his career, but from a ruin, something more valuable was born. The understanding that true knowledge isn't found in diplomas, but in recognizing value where others see only difference. Thomas's revenge wasn't to destroy the man who had humiliated him, but to transform him into someone better, proving that true leadership isn't imposed by authority, but earned by example.